One of the great insights that I've gained from being involved in this ministry, and Tom Laurie asked me last night, how much has this changed your ministry? Well, it's changed it tremendously as a priest. When you are up facing the cosmic battle up close, you really have a much different insight into the whole understanding of the Paschal mystery, the suffering, death, and resurrection of Christ. And how I even celebrate the Mass, I have a much different mindset than I did previously. It isn't that I don't celebrate the Mass any more reverently than I did, because I'm really there to pray the Mass, like this morning, with you, not to celebrate the Mass for you. It has to be an experience of prayer for me, if it has any chance of being an experience of prayer for you. Not that it's all dependent on the priest, but much like the coach of a team or a CEO, the president of the assembly sets the tone. And if the tone that's set is one of engagement, is one of reverence, is one of prayer, it's going to carry over to the assembly in the same way. And you know this just as well as I do. If the priest looks like he's just kind of, this is a job, and I'm just going through the motions, you'll see that. I've seen that. And I don't like that. So when those manifestations occur, those usually give us an insight that there is something other than the person. There is some other foreign entity that is attached. And so in the discernment of the listening for the doorways, and then when you see the manifestations, that usually gives you an indication that there is something preternatural attached. So you never start out with, this is not like Ghostbusters where, it's a 5-alarm fire and we all go out there and we're going to just do this exorcism and we're just going to kind of kick butt. You start with getting people into a regimen of prayer. Some of the people who come to us are practicing Catholics. Many of the people who come to us are Catholic, but really have kind of like jettisoned their sacramental life a long time ago. So you get them back into a rhythm of prayer. You get them back into going to Mass on at least a weekly basis, if not more. You get them back in going to confession, at least monthly. So let me make a little picture for confession. I think there's a direct correlation between the fact that the sacrament of reconciliation is in such disuse and the fact that there are so many people today who are involved in these kinds of behaviors and suffering from these kinds of maladies. So if confession is not something that you do on a regular basis, I would simply say to you, I'd ask you to really rethink it and go and find a priest. If your parish priest isn't someone you feel would be a good confessor, go find someone, a good priest, with whom you can concept of God. I believe in a personal relationship with God, and I have a personal relationship with God. A prayer life means that I want to deepen that relationship with God by spending time with God. And we all know who are our closest friends, the people with whom we have spent time with, or the people we spend time with on a regular basis. I have a very, very close friend, my closest childhood friend, I don't see very often. But we have been so close for so long that, and you probably have friends like this too, you don't see very often, but when you do, it's just like picking up where you left off. So a personal relationship with God fed by spending time in that relationship through prayer. And then a moral life, which means how do we conduct ourselves? How do we figure out right from wrong? And then how do we choose right over wrong? And then a sacramental life, which in a sense is like a set of spiritual vitamins that help seal our moral life and attach it to our faith life and our prayer life. You practice those 4, that's our spiritual armor. That's what protects us against the evil one. And so very, very often the people who come don't have a prayer life. They don't have a faith life. They may have a moral life, but their sacramental life, if they're Catholic, is maybe vague. Sometimes not. Many times it is. Now, not everybody who comes is Catholic. So I sometimes get non-Catholic Christians. And I would say the same thing with them, without the exception of course, of the sacramental life. And occasionally I will get non-Christians. I will get folks who are Jews, Hindus, Buddhists, atheists, who have opened themselves up. That's kind of the language used. They've opened themselves up. And the openings, once we know the openings, and once we see the manifestations, then what we do is we cut the ties, we sever the ties, always in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ, between the opening and the demon. And then we do all we can to cast the demon. Now, in the solemn rite of exorcism, there's a point, and it's prayed in Latin. I pray the rite in Latin. It's only been approved in 4 languages. Latin, well, 3 languages. Latin, Spanish, Italian, and Portuguese, 4 languages. It is currently on the desk of the prefect for the Congregation for the Discipline of the Sacraments in English, but he hasn't signed off on it. The bishops have, but he hasn't. I don't know whether or not I'll use it in English, because the Latin is the universal language of the church, and the demons hate Latin. And the goal is to get them out. You want to, once you learn that there's a relationship, you see that in the manifestations. Those are the signs. And then you ask what the demon's name is. Now, in the evangelical and Pentecostal traditions, they don't do that. They do the deliverances, which are similar to what we do, but they don't have a solemn rite. The Orthodox have a solemn rite. We do as well. In their tradition, their priests are automatically deputized to be exorcists. In our tradition, it's not. The rite of ordination for a bishop is what gives him the right to be the chief exorcist of the local church. I've had to tell a few bishops that actually they're the exorcists of their own diocese. They didn't know that. So in that way, once you establish that there are manifestations, then you ask it its name. Why? In the same way that on the day of our baptism, if we were infants, the priest or deacon asked our parents, "What is the name of your child?" And then they delivered the name. Not because the priest doesn't remember, but in the ritual, the naming of the child is the invitation into the realm of the light. And so in the reverse way, the demons don't want their names known, because once their name is known and they're brought into the light, then they begin to lose their power. Now, very interestingly, I saw Star Wars a couple weeks ago. And I don't want to wreck the plot, but I don't think I will be by saying this. But in the movie, the dark side has emerged because Luke Skywalker got really depressed because his nephew went over to the dark side. And so they can't find him. What happens in the movie is that the dark side begins to program all the children from all of the planets, which is exactly what happens in satanic cults. They're programmed for power and control and manipulation. When the nephew takes off his mask in the movie, as he's challenged by, I'm sure this is coming up for another movie, this girl who's related to this whole, the good versus evil, she forces the nephew to take his mask off. He becomes very vulnerable, and he begins to lose his power. And I'm watching this movie, and I just had been at a workshop on satanic ritual abuse 3 weeks ago with 25 people from 5 different exorcism teams. And I'm watching this, and I'm thinking to myself, I don't think Hollywood just kind of put this plot together. I think they knew kind of what they were doing. So in the same way, once the demon's name is known, he begins to lose power because he's been brought into the light. Satan is a liar. Satan is a deceiver. Satan is the adversary. That's what the word Satan in Hebrew means. Satan wasn't created by God. Satan was Lucifer. Lucifer was God's greatest angel. But how Lucifer became Satan all has to do with the incarnation, which is the birth of Jesus. Now, when I preach at Christmas, Yes, we talk about the birth of Jesus, but I really want to drill down and say, this is bigger than just the birthday of Jesus. It's about, what does the birthday of Jesus mean? We pray this in the Creed. When God became incarnate and he lowered himself below that of the nature of angels, the jealousy extended by Lucifer, because he and the angelic realm would now have to worship the God-man, was too much for them. And so their reaction of jealousy is what caused the rebellion in heaven, which you find in the book of Revelation. And so in the first book of the Bible, Satan is not even used in terms of a word. It's the serpent who deceives Adam and Eve. The last book of the Bible, he's no longer obsequious. He's a raging dragon, preparing to devour the church. And so in that same way, it's the incarnation that brought about this great divide that was first caused by sin. Sin is what allowed mortality to enter. Sin is what allowed Satan to enter, because God does not interfere. He gave us free will. And when he gave us free will, which is at the heart of our being human, out of respect for us, he allowed us to make our own minds up. He does the same with the angels. The angels also have free will. The angels, however, are more powerful than we are. They can travel faster than we can. They are pure spirits. They are far more intelligent, and they have a much keener sense of free will. And so the demons have no salvation, and they know it. And so from the moment that they rebelled, they began to slowly die. So they want to possess human beings because it gives them an artificial sense of life, as well as their goal is to take as many of us to hell as possible because of their hatred for the human race, because of God the Father's decision to mission the Son to save us. Why would God want to save the human race when the angelic are so much more powerful? But God's mystery of his immensity of his love compels him to do that because he's relational. And that's when he made us in his image and likeness. It doesn't mean we look like God, but at the core of God is he's a relational being, and so are we. And so he's compelled to do all he can to save us, which is why he sends Jesus, because he tried the prophets and that failed. And he tried the patriarchs and that failed. And so he sends the Son. And so when Christ's death on the cross, the sacrifice, there's a direct link between the sacrifice of the cross and the sacrifice of the Mass. Every time we celebrate Mass, we celebrate a meal of thanksgiving, which is what the word Eucharist fundamentally comes from, the Greek meaning thanksgiving, Eucharistica. What are we thankful for? We're thankful that we're saved. And in with our Judeo roots of not forgetting that, that's why we do it weekly, because he said, do this in memory of me. He didn't say, think about it, or please. It's a command performance. I say that to my kids in our parish all the time. That's the 11th commandment. Do this in memory of me, so we stay in the rhythm. And the Eucharist is a healing sacrament. It's a nourishing sacrament. It's the real deal. And I'll tell you how I know it's the real deal. I knew it was the real deal before I became the exorcist. You put the Blessed Sacrament near somebody who has a demonic attachment, I promise you, the reaction is severe, very severe.